Cześć, hello, witam, and welcome to Pierogi to Prayer, the official podcast of St. Joseph's Polish Apostolate of the Diocese of Camden, coming to you from our historic home at 1010 Liberty Street in Camden, New Jersey, the heart of South Jersey's Polonia for over 130 years. I am your host, Michael Matalevich. Step into any church in Poland or Polish ethnic parish here in the United States, and there are certain common elements that you would no doubt come across. Statues of certain saints, such as Stanislaus or Casimir, usually adorn sanctuaries and side altars. Beautifully crafted stained glass windows portraying moments in Polish history let an ethereal light, while styles of art and architecture reminiscent of the best elements of ancient churches surround you. While the details of these fixtures would vary from place to place and church to church, depending on local custom and patronages, one image, however, would be found in every one of these churches, as well as most Polish households for that matter. It is an image that is so central to Polish identity and history, and its origin steeped in legend. The face of the subject, with its mysterious expression, has stared into the very soul of peasant and pope, rich and poor alike, for centuries. You may have guessed that this image is the icon of Our Lady of Czestochowa, the Czarna Madonna, housed at the centuries-old monastery of Jasna Gora, meaning a hill of light, in the town of Czestochowa in southwestern Poland. The image depicts Mary holding Jesus in her arms, with two prominent scars on her cheek, which have a very specific history and have come to symbolize so much for Poland. The painting has become a symbol of the faith of Poles around the world, as well as a rallying point for Polish independence and national identity for centuries. Although the devotion of Poles to this image is well known, the impact of it on our two guests today comes not from their experiences of ethnic heritage, as it does for most of those who are Polish and have grown up with the icon adorning our homes and churches. Marianne and Zayas and Father Stephen Robbins are pillars of our community here in Camden. Their tireless efforts to support our apostolate may be well known by some of us listening, but the place that the icon of Our Lady of Czestochowa has in each of their lives is a fascinating story that speaks to all those who have been touched by this image. Now, our conversation may be a little bit longer than one of our usual episodes, but it was so rich in its content, and the icon of Czestochowa is so central to our Polish experiences, I doubt any of you will have any trouble listening all the way through. All right, so Father Stephen and Marianne, welcome to Pierogi to Prayer. I'm so very happy to have you guys on the program today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We're pumped up.
Great. So before we get into our discussion, so just start by telling me a little bit about yourselves, kind of what your role is with not necessarily just our apostolate, but with our parish and kind of whatever you feel is valuable for us to know about.
Mm-hmm.
So
go for it.
My name is Marianne. I am the Director of Parish Services here for the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception. So our parish here at the has the apostolate under our banner, and I do a little bit of everything. So it's a little difficult to pin down. But I'm involved in several ministries here as well, and just here to serve in the way in which the Lord has called me to serve in His church. So it's a privilege and an honor to be here and then to serve in the cathedral and the apostolate.
Okay, and you're from Camden originally?
I am. So I was born in Puerto Rico, but we moved to Camden when I was about a year old, and we lived in North Camden. So we attended Mass at Holy Name, which was my original parish, and then we came to the cathedral after the merge in 2010, I want to say, around there. So a long history, being in North Camden, and then it's actually interesting because I'm getting to know South Camden now. Camden is very, if you're from North Camden, you stay in North Camden. If you're from South Camden, you sort of stay in South Camden. So I'm actually learning more about St. Joseph now than I did when I lived in Camden, which is interesting. But yeah, we're originally from Camden and continue to work here and just be a presence here in Camden. It's my home, so.
Yeah, and both your parents, your father's a deacon. And
my dad is a deacon here. He is a deacon for our parish here. He was ordained in 2014, so 10 years. and learn a lot from him. And my mom also has various ministries. She has a women's group that she meets here on Wednesday mornings, and they very much are pillars of our community, especially in the Hispanic ministry, visiting people's homes whenever there was a death in the family or prayer needed to be said. We grew up very much tied to the charismatic renewal. So that was kind of our spiritual beginnings, was through the charismatic renewal. Then eventually, my dad felt called to the diaconate. My mom supported him, and as did I and my 3 sisters. I have 3 older sisters, and the whole family has just been able to see him grow spiritually, and in turn us grow spiritually. So it's been amazing to be a part of that and learn from him, and as my father and spiritual father, So yeah, so that's a huge blessing personally in my life, and in my own ministry, I learned from him, and the amazing conversations that we can have. Like, we'll look at articles and he'll be like, "Hey, did you see, such and such letter by the Pope?" And I'm like, "Okay, I'll read it and we'll talk about it." So that's been also just a blessing to grow in that way too. And it enriches my own spiritual life and the work that I do here at the cathedral in St. Joseph.
Yes. So my name is Father Stephen Robbins. I'm the part-time parochial vicar here at the Cathedral Parish, St. Joseph's Apostolate. I also serve part-time as the Director of Catholic Identity at Camden Catholic High School in Cherry Hill. So I've been a priest for going on 3 years now. I forget exactly when this episode is going to be released, so I might have already been a priest for 3 years by the time it's released.
September, right?
September.
August or September, I forgot.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I will have been a priest for 3 years then. May 14th was my ordination anniversary back in 2022. But I'm also a native South Jerseyite, right? So I was born in Philly, as I think a lot of people were, but I grew up in Blackwood, New Jersey. So like eastern Camden County. We grew up going to St. Luke's Parish in Stratford, New Jersey, and then after the mergers, Our Lady of Guadalupe in Lindenwold. Spent some time immediately after ordination in Latin America, in Colombia, working on learning Spanish for sort of mission purposes. And now I've been here in Camden for the last 3 years. So it's been a wild ride, but a fun one.
Yeah. And it's just been delightful to have both of you, ministering to our parish and to our apostolate. We just, in so many ways, enriched by your ministry. So thank you for that.
Likewise.
On a personal
It's
level. But yeah, it's just wonderful to have you guys. I mean, the top of our conversation today is principally Our Lady of Czestochowa. So this is the most important icon to Polish Catholicism. And, in talking about your backgrounds, neither of you mentioned Polish heritage. So that's kind of part of this too. So I guess just start by saying kind of what is it about Our Lady of Czestochowa that has brought you to her, and just speak a little bit about that.
Well, my history with Our Lady of Czestochowa goes back many, many years ago. Growing up in Camden, one of the reasons why we moved was because my twin brother, my baby brother, passed away. And that was very, traumatic for my parents. And he actually passed away on the day of our baptism. But my parents have always had a very deep life of faith and of emphasis on the sacraments, to the point where I was even baptized on the day that he died. So my mom went with my godparents to baptize me at our church in Puerto Rico. They explained to the priest what happened. I was baptized, and then they quickly, went and started planning the funeral for my brother. And that was kind of the change that we needed, or, after that happened, my parents needed a change, and they decided to move to Camden. First, it was my dad who started working, because he worked with my uncle at a landscaping company, and then a year later, my family came to Camden. And so that was the original reason why we came to Camden, was kind of just needed a fresh start after my brother's death. And my mom had a really hard time, obviously, dealing with all of that, on top of other family trauma. And I know she spoke with you a little bit about this, and she would have been here, except she speaks more Spanish. So I'm here kind of replacing her. But she gave me permission to kind of tell her story a little bit. When she was 14 years old, she was in a very bad car accident that left her scarred. So that car accident, along with other family trauma, the death of my brother, she had to find someone to talk to. She had to find a therapist to talk to. And she actually, through Guadalupe Family Services at Holy Name, is where she found a counselor, to speak to. It was an Italian woman named Nancy Catania, who we still have a very close relationship to, and who spoke Spanish, was the one to kind of initially help her through that trauma and that crisis. Because of the car accident, my mom was left very scarred on her face. And as part of her treatment, her counselor wanted to take her on a pilgrimage. And that pilgrimage was to the shrine of Our Lady of Czestochowa. And when my mom saw the image and saw that she was scarred as well, she could identify with that, And I think that's as far as I know, the image of Our Lady of Czestochowa is the only image where you see Mary's scars and, the deep wounds from the death of her son. And, so seeing her was a moment of healing for her from those emotional and physical wounds that she still had from the death of my brother, from the car accident, and other traumas that she had gone through. And after she went initially, we all went as a family. So my sisters and I like I said, I have 3 older sisters. My dad and I, we would go on pilgrimages very frequently, and I continue to do so whenever I feel like spiritually I need to be uplifted, or I need to kind of recharge the spiritual battery. I often will go to the shrine of Our Lady of Czestochowa in Doylestown, and that has been a place of refuge for our family. And so there's a personal connection, right? Like, even though I'm not Polish, the love that we have for Our Lady, and the devotion that we have to Mary has led us to have this particular devotion as a family to Our Lady of Czestochowa.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a beautiful story. And you're right. Your mom was telling me this when we had the Way of the Cross procession in Camden last Lent. We're recording this during Lent. That was last Good Friday. And I was struck by that because I've just in my past history of my association with Our Lady of Czestochowa, I've always heard this, people identifying her with different reasons. And that was the first time I had heard something like that. Yeah. Where that is a very personal way of, seeing your struggles in an image of a holy person, which you're right. I mean, and I think that there's this sense of we identify with saints and people. But a lot of times I don't think we identify with Mary a lot. And when you have that and that recognition of your suffering that's being suffered by someone like that, it's very powerful. And your mom is clearly evidence of that. I mean,
yeah. And it's been, like I said, we go at least, I want to say we go maybe 2-3 times a year to the shrine in Doylestown. And, when she went, I think it was still like a small little barn. I don't even think they had, because, it's expanded enormously. Like I know they have a retreat center now, and they have Stations of the Cross outside. So it's such a beautiful place. It's such a place and to see it come from such humble beginnings of a group of people saying we want to do something to honor Our Lady of Czestochowa, and for it to grow to where people from all over the world will go. And that's, I think, what ultimately unites us, right? It's our Lord. It's the love of our Lord and Our Lady, whether you're Polish or not. And that's the interesting part, too. Being here in Camden, you hear all the stories of the Italians and the Germans and the Puerto Ricans and, African Americans and, everybody. And just, it's challenging. I won't say it's not challenging. It is challenging because we're all trying to, kind of retain that culture. But at the same time, it's so interesting to hear everybody's stories and the differences, but ultimately the similarities of, struggle and immigration and, triumph and establishing businesses or schools and just that connection that we have. And ultimately it's through our faith, right? Through God that we're able to kind of identify with one another. So I was very happy when I knew that we were merging with St. Joseph, because my mom had gone to some of the anointing masses there in the past. So she was familiar with the church. And so I was very happy to have that connection, because it just felt providential to me that this was the church that we were going to merge with. And it's been a blessing for me to learn even more so about Polish culture and history here in Camden. So yeah.
That's a wonderful sentiment. It's something I can't help but echo enough. And it's I think for so and we've talked about this all the time about Camden's history, and sometimes it's
Yeah.
painful history. And St. Joe's, it almost seemed like it became this fortress, this bastion against what was going on around it. And yet that has, in the kind of current time, we've sometimes neglected to see the opportunity that might exist especially when parishes are merged. And even though it might be for reasons that are economical or priest shortage
Practical.
or what have you. Practical, it's perfect word. But there can be that tremendous opening up and the tremendous opportunity for growth.
Yeah.
And for people who have already had this
Yeah.
deep sense of what that place is really about is just wonderful.
And I
love
wouldn't
that.
know it unless people shared it, right? Like
Yeah.
unless people shared it with me. And now I get to be, and actually I helped with one of the tours because we wanted to open it up more to the Hispanic community who see the church, but they may not know exactly, what the history is or anything like that. So we did a tour in Spanish of the church. I know you had Henry and Dot on the podcast. And they shared that history with me, and I was able to translate it. And then we did a tour in Spanish, which was great because then people who may not can't go to the ones in English, they were able to tour the church in Spanish during the year of St. Joseph because it was designated as the pilgrimage site for the diocese. So it was just an amazing opportunity, like to share that history. And people were like, wow, I had no idea. Now they get to share it with other people. And I think that's how you keep that history alive. And also, it's something you said just reminded me of like the hope. Like, I mean, St. Joseph stands there as a building, as a place of refuge, as a place of hope for a lot of people. And I recently just heard from our Father Josh Nevitt, Bishop Sullivan's secretary, that every time he goes by, Father Stephen I don't know if you know this story, Father Stephen.
Every time they're driving on 676, like even in the middle of a conversation, Bishop Sullivan will say, and I'm going to botch this, like, or like something.
Matka Boska Czestochowa.
Like even mid-sentence, like no matter what, he will stop and say that when they pass it on 676.
And I thought that was so like amazing to hear that.
It's funny. I remember when he said that during, I think it was St. John Paul's canonization mass, and he said that, and he said it so perfectly, Matka Boska Czestochowa, and like everyone in church looked at each other like, oh my gosh, he knows Polish. And, well, those are the only words he knows. Yeah, but still, it was
maybe, I don't know. I don't want to speak for him.
Maybe we'll have him on when he retires, and we'll challenge him.
So, but right, like and I've known so many people who do go by 676, and they see the tower, and it's like they'll cross themselves, or it's just a reminder of that of yes, it's a physical building, but it's also just a sign of, like I said, hope that throughout the turmoil and it's just like Our Lady, seeing her scarred, it's a sign of hope that the scars and the difficulties and the sufferings, like, they come and go, but ultimately our faith still stands.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we just keep going on this,
Yes.
really. We'll return to, I think, some of these elements too later in the conversation, because there's a lot in there. But
yes. Whoa. Where do I begin? And it's hard to follow that. Like that's really so. But my relationship with Our Lady of Czestochowa actually started, at least intentionally, a lot more recently for me. But there are a couple of things that I've noticed, just like kind of re-examining my history, where she has inserted herself into my life in ways that I didn't even realize right at the time. And just one thing that probably a lot of people, even in our apostolate, don't know, and it's partly because I haven't really been in touch with it too much, but I actually do have some Polish blood. So my paternal grandmother was Polish. Her name was Alice Rusik. I think that was her maiden name. But she passed away when I was only like 5 years old, right? So I never really, or at least don't remember her much. And so there was never that opportunity to really transmit kind of the Polish cultural things. She was born here in America, but her parents were both Polish. So my great-grandparents on my father's side. But in any event, so it is coursing through my veins already, a little bit of Polska. But little did I know, on the day of my birth, August 26th, that is the liturgical feast day of Our Lady of Czestochowa. Now, I had no clue who she was, like literally never heard of her at all. And I grew up in the church, but not really surrounded by a lot of Polish culture, right, at all. So I had never even really heard of her until I was in seminary. I'm sure I'd definitely seen the image before, but I just didn't really think anything of it. There was no kind of intentionality behind it. But where I first was like very profoundly moved by her. And she actually became one of my favorite images of the Blessed Mother. It was in 2016. So at that point, I had just finished my first year as a college seminarian. I had done a year of secular college and then entered college seminary then as a sophomore. So I finished my first year, and all of the seminarians that summer were given the tremendous opportunity to go to World Youth Day in Krakow in Poland. And so as we were there, World Youth Day itself is only like a couple of days. But for the pilgrimage we went on, we were in Poland for probably about 10 days, almost 2 weeks. And we got to see a bunch of really important and beautiful sites. Like one of our first days, we started in Warsaw. We went to go visit St. Maximilian Kolbe's monastery. We spent a day going on pilgrimage to Auschwitz and Birkenau, which was an incredibly moving and sobering experience. And one of the days we went on a pilgrimage to the Jasna Gora monastery, which is where the image of Our Lady of Czestochowa is housed. And I'll never forget, right, again, had kind of heard of her then in my first year of seminary, didn't have much of an attraction or a devotion or anything. We had a mass at the shrine, at the sanctuary, in front of because there's like an upper basilica, and then the actual image itself, I think, is like in the sort of like a crypt.
It's a side chapel.
Yeah, like a side chapel, but a fairly large one. But we had a mass in the chapel where the image is, specifically for American pilgrims, which is cool. So Archbishop Wenski, who at the time was the Archbishop of Miami, celebrated this mass for American pilgrims to World Youth Day. And I mean, we were packed in this chapel like sardines. Like there were probably like a couple thousand people in this chapel that is not big enough to hold a couple thousand people. So there was literally no one sitting down. It was a standing room only mass with people then like pouring out onto the the balcony outside. Like outside, they had the doors open. There's people outside everywhere. And I remember being just so moved by that mass because obviously, as a seminarian, at this point, I guess I was like 19 or 20, whatever. I was young. Just the sense of like how big the church is, right? Like the church is so much bigger than my little South Jersey experience, right? But like these are just the American people. And like World Youth Day hadn't started yet. So I'm thinking in my mind, like, if these are just the Americans, like, what is this, this thing going to be? Like how big really is the church? And they're all young people, right? These aren't like the old folks that I'm used to seeing like in my parish next to me. But anyhow, I remember like after communion, some of the pilgrims just kind of spontaneously broke into song, right? So everyone's singing this, Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary. And there's thousands of people, between 18 and 30 just singing this. And they kept repeating it. And I just remember being so moved during that mass. And then after the mass, we had the opportunity to go and venerate the image, to kind of walk by and say a quick prayer and everything. And it's interesting, Marianne, hearing your mom's story, because what moved me about the image was also the scars. And also Our Lady's like apparent sadness was something that really struck me. Because like you said, Michael, like I think, we sometimes have an easy time like looking up to saints or comparing ourselves to the stories of the saints or something like that. But Mary can be tough, right? Like she doesn't sin, like she's perfect, and so to me, sometimes that can be kind of intimidating. It's one thing to look at her like as like a motherly protector, but she's so different from me because she doesn't struggle with the stuff that I struggle with or so on and so forth. But seeing this image of Mary struck me because it showed, wait a second, her life wasn't quite so easy maybe. She wasn't a porcelain doll that just made her way through life kind of untouched and unchipped or something like that. Obviously she didn't sin, but underwent real suffering. And so it's interesting just like in God's providence how the scars on the image, which came about through what, from a purely human standpoint, people would look at as a bad thing, and I forget all of the history of the Hussite invaders or something like that in the 15th century who slashed it with their sword. I've heard a couple different accounts. You can probably clarify which one is more true than others. But how God used that to draw even more people to himself through Our Lady, because showing that she knows what it means to suffer and seeing her son die, and bears the scars and the wounds of that. And so what struck me then, and really from that pilgrimage onward, I really turned to Our Lady of Czestochowa as one of my go-to kind of images of Our Lady, because in undergoing the sufferings, and you notice in the image, she's pointing to her son. So even in the dark moment, she's still pointing us back to Jesus. And my godfather, after my ordination as a priest, gave me as a gift an icon of Our Lady of Czestochowa. And so that is the image of Mary that I have in my bedroom. So every night, for those who pray the church's night prayer, part of the Liturgy of the Hours, it always ends with an antiphon sung to the Virgin Mary, kind of asking for her maternal protection. So she's what I look at every night, like it's the last thing I see before I go to bed. So she's been a big part of my journey that surprisingly kind of inserted herself into my path.
Yeah, I mean, that's a beautiful story. All of that. It's just, I knew this was going to be a great conversation, but this is awesome. This image, when you talk about religious imagery and how that sort of has interacted with cultures, it's a lot of times you see this desire to have someone look like you. And it's, you walk into St. Joseph's Church or, most of traditional older churches, and it's, what do the saints and what do Mary, what do they look like? And it's usually reflective of the population. And this image of Mary really doesn't look like a lot of people who are especially devoted to her. And there's a fascination and it's part of the fascination I've seen with the image, but it's also the simplicity of it. Nowadays we kind of are always looking for the video of when you're there, or that picture, something that is very realistic. And yet you're looking at not a very complicated image. It's fairly two-dimensional. And is it the simplicity, I wonder, that draws people into it? There's a relatability there that really defies common sense if you think about it. Not only in terms of the people who, like I said, the population that is most devoted to Our Lady of Czestochowa, which are Poles, but it just is. It's just, there's something enigmatic about it. I think it's almost like the Mona Lisa. I've heard it compared to where there's just this, but that sense of sadness. And yeah, you look at Mary's life and you think about her, and this is something I've delved into a lot, just because in my mind I'm a historian and I've had my struggles with scripture based on that. But it's like, you're looking at, probably was a 16-year-old girl in ancient Palestine, and then she went through this life of losing her son in this horrible way, executed publicly by the state authority of their day, and yet was able to maintain this tremendous faith. But she was a human too, so to have that same suffering, and but like you saying that you see that in her is really interesting, to point that out. Yeah,
it's really amazing. And I've always been really struck too by, when we think about all these different Marian apparitions that have taken place, not that this is an apparition. I think we kind of lump her into the category of Guadalupe and Fatima and Lourdes and Czestochowa. It's like, well, not exactly the same kind of thing, but just how in God's providence, right, he always sends Mary to people in a way that people are going to understand, which I think is really beautiful. Like thinking about Mexico in the 16th century, Mary needed to appear in an indigenous moment to kind of draw people to herself. But when I think about Poland too, not that Our Lady of Czestochowa is Polish even, necessarily, but thinking about the history of the Polish people, how are they best going to understand this? This is a people that knows what suffering looks like through so many kind of different moments and eras, and just the nation's history and the history of the people, that there's this pull, this gravitation towards her because, oh man, my mom knows my needs. It's just amazing. It's so beautiful, and how the Lord kind of uses all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's the survival of the image, I think, defies expectation.
Yeah.
And when you've been to Czestochowa in Poland, and you've been to Czestochowa in Doylestown, and you probably are familiar with some of those stories, but when you really look at it in Poland, where it's at, it really should have been destroyed many times, even up into the modern day. You look at how the church was repressed in the Soviet Union and in other countries. Hungary famously, I forget the name of the cardinal, but he was imprisoned for decades. Mincenty, who was in prison for decades. And even though Cardinal Wyszynski was in prison in Poland, it wasn't nearly as long. And it was impossible to break this sense. And it was like, well, why didn't they just destroy the icon? And it really should have happened, and people attempted to destroy it. That's where the scars come from. It's that sense of resilience in the face of things, and that's what, to go back to our conversation a little bit about Camden, as being seen as this place that has had a lot of problems and a lot of, which just people write it off. This pales in comparison to what this icon has witnessed in Poland's history. So. It's really,
yeah.
You think about that.
Yeah, and it's definitely something that just goes to show that sometimes the things that we're going through is nothing compared to the things that other people go through, the resiliency of people, the faith that people have. And it's something to be admired. When you were talking about the apparitions, I think when you have a devotion to Mary, you just love them all. You know, whether that's Our Lady of Guadalupe, whether that's Lourdes, whether that's... Because in Puerto Rico, we have Our Lady of Divine Providence. She was assigned to us because we didn't have a patroness on the island, so she became our patroness. But there's a reason why this particular image and devotion is given in a particular place in a particular time period. And I've learned that when you love one of them, you just love them all. You know, no matter the history or their story, there's a reason for it that they've been given to that particular country, and why she survived until this day. And we're talking about her now is because of the perseverance of that faith. And I've always loved Mary because she was just good. You know, I know it's like for some people it's like, well, I can't compare to my life, but it's something aspirational to me. It's like I may not ever get there, but I'll try. You know, like she gives me that kind of motivation to continue trying to live my faith the best way that I can. And the fact that she's just kind of silently there, I think that's what it is too. Like icons have a way of it's religious art. So it's a particular style of art. And I don't know if people are familiar with Visio Divina, Lectio Divina, which is spiritual reading, you know, reading the word of God, reading the Bible, you know, various times, you know, reading a certain passage. I very much lately, when I just don't have the energy or the desire to even read and do Lectio Divina, I enter into Visio Divina. And sometimes I'll do it through, you know, obviously iconography, because it was intended to draw you in spiritually. And so you just kind of meditate on an image, and that will, you know, continue to grow in you. And you just start feeling a tenderness for the image that sometimes you just pass by. Like how many times you have a cross or an image in your house that you've placed there, but you don't even pay attention to it after a while. And so sometimes taking that moment, because we have an image of Our Lady of Czestochowa in our office as well. So Father has it in his bedroom, but in our office here at the cathedral, you know, I share my space with a fellow Pole. And that's been amazing too, to share that space with her, because there's so much in common in our language, but also she has the image of Our Lady of Czestochowa over her desk. And sometimes I'll just come in and look at it, you know, particularly on a rough day. And so you take that moment to kind of say, well, why did I place this here? Why is she here? And so just having her icon there, right? It's meant to draw you in, because that's the point of iconography, is that sometimes when you just don't have the words, all you can do is just stare, right? And that's kind of the point of it.
Yeah. And interesting that you talk about not the words, but so this image comes from the Eastern tradition, really. It's you know, the origin of it is kind of shrouded in myth and legend, but essentially we know it came from the Eastern tradition probably via Constantinople or thereabouts, and so it does reflect the icons that are used by our Orthodox brothers and sisters. And when they don't paint icons, they write icons. That's the word they use. And there's all kinds, I'm sure you could talk about this, Father, a little bit more than I with your theological background. But, you know, there's that sense that this is the word being, you know,
fleshed
it
out.
Right. Yeah. In a way, you know, and I just think that there's a tremendous beauty in that, of just kind of, I had heard it that the icons are symbolized in Orthodox Christianity as the windows to heaven. Was one of the things that it said. And there's so many, like the different colors have different meanings. And even like the green background in Eastern Christianity is the color of the Holy Spirit, not red like we have. So that's, the Holy Spirit is behind the basic image of Our Lady of Czestochowa, and the blues and the reds and the golds. And which is, there's so much to unpack in such a simple image, which maybe is the reason why people are drawn to it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think there's a whole psychology behind that too.
Oh,
like
sure.
God uses, you know, everything, including our little brains, to draw us in. And so I love the mystery. Like I love a good Catholic mystery. Like where did it come from? Who painted it? Like it doesn't. For me personally, I don't necessarily need to know in order to enjoy it. That's just me, but I love that we don't know, because I think, I don't remember which one of you mentioned, but it was saying like we don't know exactly what she looked like. Like nowadays, everything's recorded, everything's posted. I love the fact that we have these images from a particular place and time, like I said, that we just don't really know too much about, because that's what draws you in too, is that mystery, to continue kind of looking at it from different angles, and you get more out of it, I think, when you're not exactly sure where something comes from, right? You want to know more about it, and that just draws you in.
So this image, even though it is inherently a religious one, has been used secularly a lot in Poland. Lech Wałęsa was famous for having the picture on his lapel pin during the Solidarity movement. And there was actually a controversy recently when her halo was made the rainbow flag as part of a protest in Poland. So there's this kind of secularization that you get with some images. I think you see this in Poland a lot, with this icon in particular. And I think that's something that we've been able to do with this podcast, because to be Polish is so often to be Catholic, and so those two places kind of intersect a lot. Do you think that Our Lady of Czestochowa can kind of be seen a little bit here in the U.S. like that in a way? Do you see I guess a tool, or is this something like, am I just chasing down a different a path that doesn't really go anywhere? But it was something I was thinking of in terms of, like, so when we talk about how Polish Catholicism has sort of worked, and then now we have it transported here, and what has worked and what hasn't. Do you think there's a role for Our Lady of Czestochowa kind of outside of the religious sense?
Wow, that's a really
good question. Yeah.
It's so interesting.
That's a good question. Yeah.
I mean, in some sense, I think absolutely, right? Like we were just talking about, there's something about this image, right? That's very, you use the word enigmatic. There's something very ethereal about it that in her simplicity kind of draws our attention. I wonder if even just like with what we've already talked about, I don't know about a specific necessarily like social cause with which we would associate her. But I think just talking about like how can we use culture in some kind of way to point people back to the faith in some way. I'm trying to think of a specific context in which this would happen, but I think she could most certainly be some sort of I hate to use the word tool, like not that we're using Mary, but you know what I mean, in terms of like, just like raising awareness of this image, because I do think her association with what it means to sorrow could be something that like can reach people in so many different like walks of life, in so many circumstances and situations. And the fact of her, right, like she's called like the Black Madonna, right, like the Czarna Madonna, which is one of my, I qualify, is my favorite Polish song that I've ever heard.
Me too.
Not that I know that many Polish songs. Yeah. I'm growing in my kind of awareness of them, but thinking about like all kinds of like situations of racial tension, right? Like how Our Lady can reach people in so many situations through this image, just about suffering in general, in whatever sense. But the part that just always like reminds me or always draws me in is she's always pointing to Jesus. Like we always talk about Mary in this image, when clearly, like, if we pay attention to the details of it, she's trying to point us back to him. And we know that he comes to be the savior of all, and he comes to redeem every part of our human existence and to bring the light into like every single situation of darkness. So I know that was not a very specific answer to your question, but I just think like there's something really powerful about this particular image of Our Lady that at least has the potential to kind of touch people and reach people in a whole assortment of situations. Mm-hmm. Hopefully, God willing, ultimately to point them back to Jesus, which is what we're all about.
Yeah, we're all looking at the middle of the table, by the way, because Mike has put an image here, which I'm so happy that we can reference as we're having this conversation. But for me personally, it's very much about motherhood and femininity and an image on how to suffer well. I think sometimes, because you look at her and you see her sad, but she doesn't look desperate. She's clinging to Jesus. She looks serene. And Father said, like, it's suffering in its many forms, but particularly I think, and in the history in my own particular family, it was a loss of a child and specific trauma that led to my own mom having this devotion, and then I learned about it through my mom. So I think to me it speaks definitely of motherhood and women who can't have children, or women who have kids and they're suffering because their children have, either strayed away from the church or have chosen a different path. Mary in general has spoken to me in that particular way, is what is my role as a woman in the church? What is my role, in supporting priests in our parish? So what does that look like for me? What is Mary telling me as a woman in the church? What example has she given me, And for me personally, it's that quiet endurance, which I seek to imitate, that endurance, that perseverance, and also that serenity that she represents in this particular image too, that Jesus knows my own particular suffering in a personal way, and to give him that suffering, and also to ask for her intercession, right? As Catholics, we ask Mary's intercession just like we ask someone to pray for us, right? And that's the role that she has. And do I go to her in those moments of suffering, because she knows well what it means to suffer? So to me, that's what it speaks more so about, is motherhood, and just as a woman, what am I called to imitate? And I always look at Mary as that model of sweetness, our life, our sweetness, and our hope. And am I being sweet? Am I imitating those qualities that I particularly, and virtues that I want to have, that she had? So
yeah, no, I mean, I think that's those are beautiful sentiments in answer to that question, because, like you said, there is so much suffering, and I think that is part of it too. Like, especially now, it's plastered all over the news and social media how much suffering there really is in the world. And in the East, you can look, Poland's neighbor, Ukraine,
right.
And this is an icon that came from the East as well. I think that there's a lesson in that. And there was something that I thought of when you were talking about the Czarna Madonna hymn. When I had gone to Częstochowa, in Poland, to Jasna Gora, and on the tour that I did, they had mentioned that the Czarna Madonna was actually, that came from, essentially it was like I guess like a slur you could call it, that the Nazis were criticizing the icon, saying, oh, well, she's just, it's just black, it's like a ruined, it was like a very derogatory statement. And yet now, in our modern, and since then, we've taken that word, the Czarna Madonna, and turned it into this beautiful song that has resonated with so many people. I mean, we sing it at St. Joe's very often.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful hymn, and but it does have this great appeal, and it's kind of had this evinces this feeling. Are you familiar with the pielgrzymka, the walking pilgrimage that goes to Częstochowa?
Yes, I've always wanted to do it, and I know that the two of us have even talked about it before, but I've never been able to, just with the way circumstances have gone out. But I think it starts somewhere in North Jersey or something like that.
Yeah, Great Meadows. Well, so you can do different stages, but it starts in Great Meadows.
Yeah.
And this is modeled off of what happens in Poland every year, from all over the country, which is a beautiful. I remember seeing people walking, and there's always the social media pages that I follow for my family's parishes and all over there, and it's like, oh, this so and so is taking our petitions on when they start this pilgrimage, this walking pilgrimage, which can take a month, especially if you're from Northeast Poland like I am. But I mean, there's these kind of opportunities here too for that. But at the end of the pilgrimage, they're singing this Czarna Madonna hymn over and over again.
Whoa.
So hopefully someday in the future, maybe we can even get a group from the apostolate or the Diocese of Camden and go, because it is. I mean, I think what we've kind of talked about here and there is this sense of bringing people to our, because there's so much there. There's so much there to St. John Paul II. He's immortalized, I guess I should say, in kind of Polish Catholic culture, but also Roman Catholic culture as well. I mean, he was this great Polish priest who was given to the church, and he had this very particular devotion to Our Lady, especially Our Lady of Czestochowa. I mean, his motto was "Totus tuus," So, other than his being Polish, how do you think this might have affected his ministry throughout the world, like his devotion to Our Lady specifically, in terms of how, what about him and how his? Because I mean, we're all the St. John Paul II generation,
children.
really. You know, we grew up with him. He was a rock star.
Yeah.
Do you see any correlations with that? I'm just curious because, you know, and we always see him as like this Polish person who was sent to the church and, like I said, has gone out and in his ministry. Do you think that affected him at all?
I think so. I mean, someone correct me if I'm describing this wrong, but wasn't it his addresses that led to theology of the body and the feminine genius? His Angelus, was it his after the Angelus? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, well, the theology of the body would have been his Wednesday audience.
Thank you, Wednesday audience. That's what I'm thinking of. And then eventually led to the feminine genius. There's a book that I read. Catherine Zeno, I believe, is her name. And it was based off of theology of the body, and it was talking about, you know, women in the church and St. John Paul II's teachings. And I think that definitely stemmed from a relationship with Mary. I mean, the beauty in it and just his emphasis on, again, and I speak on it as someone who sometimes, you know, was given two views of femininity, right? This feminism that was very, you know, extreme. And then what does the church teach about our role in the life of the church? And I found a lot of strength in St. John Paul II's writings about women. And I really believe that had to be inspired by Our Lady, just his own relationship with, and then please correct me again if I'm wrong, didn't his mom die?
He did. I was going to say that. Yeah, he lost his mom at a young age.
Not having a mother, what do? You seek, you know, comfort in Mary, you know, in that moment. So definitely, I think that had a huge impact on his papacy and just his personal prayer life.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's super beautiful. And also just thinking and seeing, for him observing, right, because he obviously lives through the Second World War, he lives through the oppression of these communist regimes, and seeing how it's the intercession of Mary and this love for the Czarna Madonna that kind of keep his people's hopes alive, I'm certain would have influenced the way then when he becomes Pope, that he sort of engages with these other kind of persecuted cultures in places where Christianity was kind of under the gun, under whatever regimes, whether it be in Asia, in different places in Africa, in the Middle East. So that of recognizing how the faith of a people carries them through, recognizing Our Lady's role in that, recognizing the way in which Mary can draw people to Christ, right? Seeing for himself in his culture, then seeing how that kind of plays out in other cultures, as, you know, because he traveled more than anybody, probably more than almost any human person ever. You know, when you just combine up all the miles and doing these pastoral visits to these different countries. Yeah. And so I'm sure it would have just like formed the way in which he sought to like, okay, how do we, you know, bring Christ into these places? Would have been formed by the way in which he saw Christ brought to him very frequently through the kind of intercessory. I could go on and on about that because, like you said, I mean, he literally chose his papal motto, totus tuus ego sum, I am totally yours, from St. Louis de Montfort's book about Mary. She obviously was a pretty critical importance for him in the way in which he followed Christ. So that would have formed the way he proposed Christ to other people too.
Which, you know, as we kind of talked about, is the central aspect of the image. I'm going to butcher the word, but hiodetriya.
Yeah.
She who shows the way.
Yes, right? Exactly.
You know, I mean, it's kind of, like you're drawn into Mary and,
right.
You know, and that's, we hear this I mean, you've heard his criticism since the Reformation about Catholics and images, but and this also devotion to Mary, that you're creating sort of this separate identity, you're worshiping Mary and not Christ, and, you know, for people who do find Christ inaccessible, for maybe women, for instance, to neglect, and this isn't a knock on our Protestant brothers and sisters by any stretch, but there's an opportunity there. And I think that's a lot of what the church has to offer people in general now. Speaking for myself, is I had heard this quote one time, and it said, religion hasn't been tried and found wanting, it's been found wanting and not tried. And there's always this tremendous opportunity there. There's these great depths of spirituality, you know, being a Jesuit educated, Ignatian spirituality is central to my whole life.
Amen, brother.
There we go. Yeah, holy name.
Yeah,
that's right.
Holy name. Nation.
But, you know, it's in the simple things too, in these simple images, these two-dimensional icons. There can be a lot there that you're just not even trying with. And I think that's something that we as practicing Catholic Christians try to get across. And it can get, I think it gets knocked away unfortunately by other stuff. Mm-hmm.
I think, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why I brought up too about it being an image that you can just look at without words. I mean, we do have people that can't read. There are people that, or they read something lengthy and they don't understand it, so I think that's where that comes from too. I mean, we are, as Catholics, we use all our senses, right, to enter into worship. And that's the point why we have bells, to listen to, or images to look at, and incense to smell. It's all there where we're totally involved. And I mean, it's the reason why I love being Catholic, is because we want all of you. I have to be completely involved in worship, and I get a lot out of that, right? So there are people who all they can do is look at an image in order to enter into prayer. And also, I love that JP2, has this great devotion to Our Lady, because he brought that wherever he went. And there's something so disarming about Mary, right? I mean, you can pick apart Jesus's words, right? But Mary literally maybe has 4 lines. The longest thing she says in the Bible is the Magnificat, and it's literally just glorifying God. So it's so interesting how she's, to some people, she's so controversial. But when you look at what she said, I don't know, there's just something there for me, that there's a softness and a loving gaze and a loving presence that draws people in, because she first kind of has to come in to transform that, and then we allow Jesus to kind of come into our hearts through her, right? So there's something there for me. Even when if I'm having a day where I just feel like I can't pray right now, there's something about the rosary that I'm like, okay, I can do this. It's 20 minutes. I can go for a walk, calm down, pray the rosary. Or there's something there about that when everything else fails. She's the one that I personally turn to when I find it difficult to enter into any other, form of prayer. And that's coming from someone who grew up Catholic, so I can only imagine people when they're first kind of discovering this sense of where is God calling me to go? Whether, because I find that people nowadays are questioning a lot. What does this all mean? Why am I here? Through suffering, because of some of the things that you mentioned, when you turn on the news and there's so much going on. That's when Mary can kind of come in and say, all right, let me in, I've been there, this is where maybe I can. And I know people who are not Catholic who pray the rosary. There's been times when we've had funerals for people, or I know of someone who's passed away, and they had left the church, but they still get their rosary. In the Hispanic community, we do a novena of rosaries, 9 days of praying the rosary for someone who's deceased. And the person may have left the church, but they're still praying the rosary. So there's something enduring about it that I think just speaks to the heart. And that's what draws people in more than anything. I mean, you can have a great theological conversation and dig into the reasons why things are the way they are, or why Jesus established his church. But there's something about just feeling it and just the emotional side of it that I think draws people in when it comes to Mary particularly.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the Magnificat. One of the lines I really like is, cast down the mighty from their thrones, which it can be seen as this very great call to action, but it's a disarming statement if you think about it, casting down the mighty from their thrones. So I think that's a really key part of the puzzle, the mystery, maybe.
Yeah. Sometimes I'm the mighty one that needs to be cast down.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's true.
Aren't we all?
Oh, yeah. You've both mentioned, Father, you've been working as a priest in this parish for 3 years, and in the city of Camden. Marianne, you've lived here and you work here for a long time. Do you see the relevance, and we've talked about this a little bit, but the value and the relevance of Our Lady of Czestochowa today, in the world and this country that we've talked about, but in particular our diocese, our state here. We're the Polish apostolate of the Diocese of Camden and the city of Camden. Do you, just based on your own personal ministry, to our parish. You've come to know these people very well, whether it's at St. Joseph's Polish or at the Cathedral Parish, former, the Immaculate Conception, the cathedral, or even Holy Name, Our Lady of Fatima, which was also part of our kind of territory now. I just in terms of the population you've served, do you see her having a potential role there?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, as far as like the Hispanic community, we celebrate them all. I mean, every time we have a particular, Marian devotion, whether that's our Divina Infantita, which is the Divine Infancy of Mary, we celebrate it because there's a Mexican community here that has a particular devotion to it, whether like it's Our Lady of Divine Providence, the patroness of Puerto Rico, whether it's Our Lady of Alta Gracia, Our Lady of Highest Grace from the Dominican Republic, we celebrate it. So, I mean, we are very Marian people in this parish. And so I don't see why, we can't do more, right? To celebrate Our Lady of Czestochowa and to bring that particular devotion to everyone here in our parish and in Camden. And we often celebrate these other Marian devotions with either a small procession around the church. And you'll see people, honk their horn or cross themselves, if they see us. So there is a sense of like, and I will say Camden is interesting in that way where people have a particular respect for religion. I'll say that because even when we mentioned our Good Friday procession, that is so impactful here in the city, to have that here downtown, and people from all over will come by, and again they'll sign themselves with the sign of the cross, or they'll stop for a second and say a prayer. So as we're kind of just talking, it's like develop for me, just kind of thinking about in that way of how to maybe publicly show our devotion for Our Lady of Czestochowa as a parish, and it is Our Lady through this conversation calling us to do so, right? Because we are very, very Marian in our parish, and I think that's something, again, like that sweetness, that the power of the rosary, just draws us in, and so that maybe is something that can be explored.
Yeah. So there's two things that come to my mind. One, and I know we've talked about this several times already on this episode, but we keep talking about Our Lady of Czestochowa and her appeal to those who are suffering. And I think regardless of what your ethnic background is, right, and your experience of Catholicism, I think everyone in this city in a very particular way knows what it means to suffer in one way or another, whether that be financially, whether that be through like sort of brokenness within the family, whether that be struggles with addictions, whether that be like estrangement of loved ones from the church. All of us know what it means to suffer. So I think just in God's providence, in some way, Our Lady of Czestochowa could be just like a spiritual gold mine, for people to once again recognize the Lord's closeness with them, kind of in that experience of suffering. And the other thing that comes to my mind, just as, we enter into this new era in our diocese with our new bishop, Bishop Joseph Williams, I remember back in September of 2024 when we celebrated the Mass of Welcome for Bishop Williams, when he first arrived as the coadjutor bishop. Something that like really struck and moved me a lot. So in the church, there's no like ritual for like a Mass of welcome, right? Like it's just, we're having a Mass like to welcome him. And the prayers of the Mass he chose struck me to the heart very, very deeply. He chose to celebrate the Mass of Our Lady of the Cenacle, which is not something that is very well known. I had never even heard of this. It's one of these very specific sort of sets of prayers, but it's the idea of Mary and the apostles gathered together in the upper room praying before Pentecost happens. Because that Acts of the Apostles chapter 2 tells us on the day of Pentecost, it's all of the apostles together with the mother of Jesus, like Mary's there with them. And something that Bishop Williams has said many times as I think mission and evangelization is kind of at the forefront of his mind and his dreams for the church and for our diocese in a special way. And he has quoted many times, I guess he's quoting Pope Francis, who's probably quoting Pope Benedict, who's probably quoting John Paul II, who's quoting Paul VI. Like it's pretty consistent, like magisterium.
It's all
there.
derivative, right?
Yeah, but there's this one very specific line that he said that really struck me. They've said, because we hear all the time in the church this idea of a new evangelization. Well, if we think about the first evangelization only happens after Pentecost. And so you can't have a new evangelization without having a new Pentecost. So in some way, might we be invited right now to gather around Mary in prayer as we beg for the Holy Spirit to come down upon us to kind of set this city and this diocese on fire again, just makes me wonder and gets me pumped up. Like, what more could Our Lady's role, and specifically through this image of Our Lady of Czestochowa, be as we seek to re-evangelize the people, not just of Whitman Park, not just of North Camden, not just of South Camden, not just downtown, but everywhere here. I think there's a lot that God might have in store through all of this.
Yeah, I think you're right. And one thing that just came to mind, not to answer my own question here, but you know, we're recording this podcast the Friday after Ash Wednesday, and you know, I went to Ash Wednesday on Wednesday, and the church was full. And I was listening to this other podcast by plug AMDG, my friend Mike Lasky, and he was having this interview with someone who just wrote a book on Ash Wednesday, and there was discussion about how it doesn't matter where you are. You can walk into it. You haven't been to a church in forever. You can walk into a church on Ash Wednesday and get your ashes. You get something for nothing. And there's so many reasons people find to not walk into church. And, you know, maybe the wide appeal of this image is part of that, of why too. You know, maybe this is, in a sense, you're getting something for nothing. You don't have to have anything to look at this image of Our Lady and to get something from it, whether you're Polish or Puerto Rican or, you know, Italian or, you know, fill in the blank. It just is. It just kind of made me think of that just because it's timely relevant.
Right.
But yeah, it could very well be. It could be an invitation that we've been waiting for. Maybe.
Yeah. So
Bishop Williams, if you're listening.
Yeah, at Bishop Williams. Yeah. Bishop Williams.
Exciting times.
Because he will have been our bishop for several months by the time.
And he's been to St. Joseph now twice.
He has.
Twice. Yeah. So that's, I mean, to have that's a blessing, you know, to have him so close too.
I know.
You know,
well, that's the house of St. Joseph.
Yeah.
It's the house of Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
So
go to Joseph.
Go to Joseph. That's right. That's right. Marianne and Father Stephen, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation about Our Lady of Czestochowa, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you so much.
That's great. Dziękuję.
If you would like more information on Our Lady of Czestochowa, be sure to check out our social media pages this month. Or better yet, schedule a trip to the National Shrine located not far from us in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. Their annual Polish-American Festival and Country Fair, coming up at the end of this month from August the 30th to September the 1st, as well as September 6th through 7th, and the largest Polish-American festival in the country. This is a great time to go if you've never been, as everything that is great about Polish culture and history is on full display. I will also be there this year, distributing information on our podcast, as well as our fast approaching With God in Camden event, which begins next month. Be sure to seek us out and say hello if you're a regular listener to the program. If you haven't registered yet for With God in Camden, there is still time before our deadline on September the 8th. Visit www.withgodincamden.info for more information. As always, don't forget to follow our social media pages on Facebook and Instagram, as well as rate our show on whatever listening platform you use. I can't emphasize enough how in this age of algorithms and AI, the value of this interaction with our pages places on our visibility. You can also always drop us a line at pierogideprayer@gmail.com for feedback on this or any of our other episodes. We do truly love to hear from you, as well as any suggestions on what we may do better. You can of course always visit us every Sunday at 10 a.m. at our home at St. Joseph's in Camden. And until next time, salte some pierogi and go sit with the saint. Dziękujemy, thank you, and do usłyszenia.